Have you seen this? Look over your shoulder. There it is again. It's getting closer.
Welcome to Have You Seen This?
The world's only podcast about obscure, overlooked, and misbegotten media.
All discussions will be spoiler heavy.
You have been warned.
This show would not be possible without the support of our patrons. If you would like to support our show, join us at patreon.com/haveyouseenthis. Patrons get the show a week early, and $5 supporters also get access to our Discord. Or you can tip us at our Ko-fi. Visit the link in the show notes.
For this episode, we are covering A Ghost Story for Christmas, and our guest is Ray Newman, author of Municipal Gothic and Thin Places in Hard Concrete, a couple of horror short story anthologies. So welcome, Ray.
It's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. We'd wanted to do an episode about A Ghost Story for Christmas, but neither of us really felt, qualified. Like, I'm a fan of the series. Jen is less familiar with it, but
I love British TV and teleplays generally, stuff like the Stone Tape in the horror vein, and of course, like everyone knows that we've talked about folk horror on this show, and folk horror has
talk it to
become,
death.
Yeah, well, it's heated up quite a bit as a topic, like through the 2000s. So we're always interested in the weird and strange. And also, like Tim said, we did want to do A Ghost Story for Christmas, the British series, for quite a long time, and needed a knowledgeable guest to talk about it. But we couldn't find a really good one until we met Ray, which is why we're doing Christmas in July in April. So bear with us.
Right, perfect timing. Yeah. And Ray, just like from your online writing, you seem to do a lot of sort of categorical studies of different kinds of horror. So I wondered if you could maybe explain or get into what like the cultural context is for like A Ghost Story for Christmas.
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned British television plays, and I think that's the first thing to understand is that we've got this really great tradition of really well-made short films, essentially, and these one-off films that are part of larger strands. So The Ghost Story for Christmas, it's got quite a complicated history, but it ran all the way through the 1970s, one story per year, with largely the same creative team. And each of them works as a standalone film. There's obviously no connection between them other than just they share a sort of a mood and a creative style. And one thing that I've really found over the last few years, I'm by far the most expert person in this field. I will mention a couple of other names later of people who have gone so deep into this. But one thing I found is that The Ghost Story for Christmas is a sort of starting point. And the more you look, the more you find more 30-minute, 45-minute one-off films based on classic English or British ghost stories. Many of them are or original stories in a similar vein, and many of those are also absolutely brilliant. But The Ghost Story for Christmas has this kind of special status because at Christmas, obviously, what you want to think about is death and mortality and terror.
Right.
That's what Christmas is all about.
No, I do.
That is that's an interesting point, because one of the episodes that we'd done earlier was a recent revamp of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Guy Pearce, which is a great, like, really bleak imagining the story. And I'm wondering, and I don't know if you know, but like it seems like that conflation of horror and Christmas was pretty much led by A Christmas Carol. Is there any validity to that?
I think that's the theory I've heard before as well. And, there's a film, isn't there, from a very cheesy film from a few years ago about Charles Dickens called The Man Who Invented Christmas. But many of our Christmas traditions are sort of connected to Dickens in some way. And I think what he was particularly good at identifying was this sense that the midwinter is a time, you mentioned I've got a collection coming out called Thin Places in Hard Concrete, but Christmas is like a thin time of year when the days are short. And in Britain, in winter, we get very little daylight. It's just kind of, even when the sun does come up, it's just kind of grey and flat and raining, very rarely snowing. So it just has this kind of spooky vibe. And I think what Dickens worked out brilliantly was that contrast with the season of goodwill and all of the colour and the jollity of Christmas. What if you just step away from that for a moment and just on Christmas Eve, just think about the darker side of life, and that then throws all of that Christmas jollity into sharper relief, really, and makes the Christmas feel all the sweeter. I suppose that's sort of my theory on what the connection is.
Okay, yeah, and it does fit regionally because it's an environment that is conducive to this sort of outlook where, yeah, if you have like really short days and everything is like gray and bleak, yeah, it's hard to kind of like keep Christmas in your heart, and uh, a lot of the writing can express that kind of disconnect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's
Um,
also that um, inimitable feeling that you get from kind of British horror and folk tales. And this is something which we touched on in our episode about Penda's Fen,
Mm-hmm.
that feel of like kind of a heaviness of history
Mm-hmm.
about England and the countryside, and that undercurrent of paganism
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to kind of like the superstructure of good old Anglican Christianity, the way those
Mm-hmm.
things are constantly at tension, which is really one of my like favorite kinds of horror theme, because
Mm-hmm.
it's anything which throws back to like a truly frightening ancient history, like the Lovecraftian or whatever. I That kind of thing is catnip to me. It's why I love the stone tape so much and things like that. And that definitely inspired kind of the progenitor of what we're talking about today, M.R. James, who of course was like a Christian academic who was also
Mm-hmm.
very tuned into the horrific, but we're going to get to him.
right.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a couple of things you said there that are interesting. First, I was going to say that the Stone Tape. It's always worth remembering that that's sort of a ghost story for Christmas, as in it was broadcast at Christmas. It just wasn't part of the main strand. It's got no Christmas themes in it. I'm always very keen to point out these are ghost stories for Christmas, not ghost stories set at Christmas.
Right.
So the Stone Tape totally fits into the run. And actually, you mentioned. I think that you'd seen Stigma, which is one of the later BBC ghost stories
Hmm.
for Christmas, and the Stone Tape and Stigma, that contemporary setting is something that they have in common. And I think you also just mentioned texture, and I think this is a thing I come back to when people talk about hauntology or folk horror, then they sort of muddle the two up sometimes. And a lot of it is just about the feel of the film and the British landscape and the texture of film or video, depending on how the thing was shot. But that sense of sort of grain and grit and slight washed out quality, a
Yes.
bleakness, a lack of music, sometimes just kind of silence or electronic sound effects. Is they that's the thing that lots of these things have in common. When people often say, "Oh, the Stone Tape is a great example of folk horror," and I always think I don't see
Mm,
I don't see it as folk horror at all. What you mean is it looks and feels like some things that are folk horror. I think it's like a textural thing.
Right.
right. And that's the full core thing is like a whole ass conversation. We've
Of
had it
course,
before with a
of
friend of the
course.
show, Bitter Corella. We all definitely have opinions on that. I just feel like folk horror should involve, folk,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
which the
great.
Stone Tape doesn't
Well, it's
really.
well, yeah, it violates one of the two rules for folk horror, and that it doesn't take place outside, so it can't be
Yeah,
folk horror. Yeah.
yeah. But if you check online, if you look on Letterboxd, you'll find hundreds of lists of essential folk horror with, I don't know, 11 films on, and one of them is the Stone Tape. I find it very weird, but
Yeah,
yeah,
Right.
it's like yacht rock. Everyone
yeah,
thinks they know
yeah,
what it is, but it's a specific thing. Damn it.
yeah.
Anyway,
So if you were to categorize the Stone Tape, you'd say that's more like hauntology,
Yeah,
or
and hauntology, like folk horror and like yacht rock, is a sort of modern, a post rationalization of how you fit things together, an
yes,
invented genre. But I think that, and hauntology, it's not really a genre. I always get quite confused trying to understand hauntology because I think it's a word that has the meaning of the word has changed as well. But it's generally used these days to talk about these kind of, in the UK, definitely about these things that are products of what sometimes people also call the haunted generation, which is this idea that I don't know if you've ever seen that Scarred for Life is a website and a series of books now a podcast, I think, that talks about the fact that it's become a cliche to say in Britain that for some reason all media was scary for about 20 years, even if it didn't need to be. So like advertisements for oatmeal would be scary. And this is true. I grew up watching adverts for an oatmeal product called Ready Brek, which had like a weird glowing kid walking across a stormy moor. And I don't know, and children's TV shows were absolutely terrifying. Just things were unnecessarily gothic feeling and spooky. And the Stone Tape fits really soundly into that. I think that sense of just dread and it just being it feels like the media itself is haunted. The spooky electronic sounds and the grain and the ghosting in the video. It feels like there's something actually kind of spooky about the film itself, quite apart from the subject matter, which I think is again something all these ghost stories for Christmas kind of have in common, I think.
Yeah, it's nice to see like the medium helping to sort of establish the mood of like the content itself. One of the things too that I kind of, I guess one of my pet theories in that I used to explain a lot of the point of view of a lot of this kind of vein of British horror is that it seems like it is coming from a mindset of living on sort of a cursed isle. Like there are centuries of like pagan rituals and bloodshed and strife and conflict that is all like it's just right outside your door.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that's like kind of constantly like sort of casts a pall over like modern life, knowing that what has gone on here for centuries.
Yeah, definitely, and I think even today there are a couple of examples of things I just think are interesting, like the fact that we found a few years ago that the body of Richard III underneath a car park.
Yeah, that was so cool. I was like, that is literally the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then the recreation of his face.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked just like the portraits. Oh my god! Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting excited just talking about it. Forgive me.
Yeah, and this is. And I try not to sort of buy into, Britain's a magical, wonderful place. I mean, you've grown up here. You're very well aware of its flaws and so on. But
right.
This history thing is true. So I live in a suburb of Bristol in the southwest of England, and it's a very if you could look out the window I'm looking out of now, you'd see it's quite an unremarkable place. Lots of industrial buildings and roads and small houses. Nothing very exciting about it. And I was reading a book by the local history society that was published about 40 years ago, and it just happened to have a transcript of the time Henry VII came to Bristol in the 15th century and rode his horse and with his procession past my house to visit a sacred well and an ancient chapel that is now round the back of a supermarket. The chapel's gone. The well is still there. But it's just this sense of everywhere there is, and history is just not very far beneath the surface. And that's a key theme of M.R. James, I think, is that there was a tweet years ago, someone said you could sum up all M.R. James' stories. Something like, I don't know where you found that, but put it back. Like people digging in the ground, finding things they shouldn't, taking them with them. And that's a recurring theme in his stories. And certainly is the theme of Oh Whistle, as the story's called, Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, or the TV version, Whistle and I'll Come to You, is that sense of, he the innocent professor does something he shouldn't do, takes something he shouldn't, and madness ensues, essentially.
Yeah, they're like forces like older and stranger than you're even prepared to deal with, and they're all like right under your feet.
Yeah.
Speaking specifically about Whistle and I'll Come to You, because that's kind of the inaugural Ghost Story for Christmas episode, and that really set the tone. And it seems like there are like certain tropes of that subgenre, if I may call it that, of like you say, it's sort of like a tweedy sort of professorial type who finds something and kind of gets in it over his head.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you had any thoughts about like the protagonist, like the main character of Whistle and I'll Come to You, that because he seems like very learned, but also like really insular.
And
incurious.
This was fascinating to me because it had been a while since I had watched the original 1968 Whistle and I'll Come to You. It was, of course, remade and expanded on with John Hurt in that role, and I forget what year, but in the 2000s. Right. Watching this again, it was interesting to me to see a character so profoundly not antisocial, but almost asocial in a way. And telling on myself a little bit, like he reminded me a bit of how I feel sometimes, like, post COVID, where you've been like holed up for a long time and you've started talking to yourself in public because you don't remember how to act. You don't remember how to converse with people. Like,
I mean, I've always been like that, but
well, we all have degrees of that, but
yeah.
because, and the actor is really good. This is a fully embodied character, expanded on quite a bit from the original story. Because I think in the original, as I recall, he's like a much younger, sort of fastidious guy. And in this, you get this real sense of a middle-aged, lifelong bachelor, completely absorbed in his own work. And just kind of, when he has to go out, like just kind of trundling along, like mumbling to himself. And when he encounters other people, there's this feeling of like, not like he's startled, but just like, oh, I didn't see you there. Cause like he doesn't see he doesn't see the people around him, and he's completely unconcerned with his own strangeness. And you spend the entire runtime of the program like just with this guy and kind of like the little bubble with him, and his experiences up to a point are so mundane that it really like underlines the eventual horror, because like when it hits you, it's like, oh shit, like that's terrifying. And I think that's
Right.
that is a lot of the power of this original teleplay.
Yeah, it's almost played like a comedy up to a point. And Michael Hordern, who plays, I can never remember which way around it is. In the TV, he's Parkin, and in the story, he's Parkins, I think, who plays Parkin, is kind of associated in Britain more with comedy than with drama. I think that's fair to say. So he was someone as a child. He narrated Paddington is now kind of a global phenomenon. But when we were kids, there was a very cute cartoon with little cutout paper characters, really beautifully made, and Michael Hordern narrated it and did the voice of all the characters. So I grew up hearing him constantly as a child, and as an adult, being interested in the work of P.G. Wodehouse, I heard him play Jeeves the butler on the radio. So his voice is very, and obviously it's a very warm sort of. He's modulating it very carefully in this production to make it that kind of mumble, that sort of semi-audible muttering he does the whole time.
Like half words, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my favourite line in the adaptation is when he sees a dog and just says, some sort of a dog. That is just a brilliant. But it's like I laughed quite a lot watching it up until the point it's suddenly not funny.
Right.
And it's almost played like a comedy. And that moment, I was thinking, rewatching it most recently, the moment when the maid in the hotel says, "Would you like me to turn down your bed, sir?" And he's so fascinated by the phrase, he just repeats it to himself and walks away, and just doesn't respond, doesn't answer her question. And it's, you could probably do an edit of this, which is about like a Jacques Tati, about an odd little guy staying in a hotel, and just remove the horror. So yeah, no, his performance. It really holds the thing together, I think, and the fact that Jonathan Miller, had that improved on the original story. I think most people agree, by making the character, instead of just a youngish jerk who likes playing golf, he's an old, slightly vulnerable, slightly peculiar character who doesn't really like doing anything other than wandering about and being an academic.
Yeah, just sort of wandering around and like muttering to himself. Because even when he finds like this whistle of great significance, he's just kind of muttering aphorisms. He's like, give a dog a bone, finders keepers. Just like,
yeah, exactly.
Just
God,
like
it's me driving any distance in a car by myself.
Yeah. But the thing too that I wonder about this character is this M.R. James saying, like, because it seems like the way that he's presented is saying, if you're a fan of horror, or if you're an academic who studies the arcane, or just any sort of esoteric subject, it's all like very very safe and abstracted until the point where you actually encounter the thing that you're studying, where it suddenly becomes horrific.
Yeah, and the horrific thing in this film is particularly brilliant, and that's something that then in the films that followed gets picked up on, which is what's the least you can show, or the briefest moment you can have the horror on screen and still have the effect. And I think the reason these films are so effective and have survived so well is because of the subtlety of the horror. You don't see it for very long. It isn't very explicit. You're not often quite clear what you've seen, and that's much more powerful than, I don't know, some guy in a rubber mask kind of lurching around in front of the camera for 25 seconds, which would ruin the effect, I think.
Right, yeah. Because even at the end of the story, it has been a fairly mundane experience up until now, and there are a lot of disconnected moments that all kind of fit together. There's finding a strange whistle. There's a guy trying to make conversation and talking about ghosts, and oh, it's too spooky to go out at night. His bed being unmade, but like you put the three of those things together, and it's like, is that enough to draw the conclusion that yes, this is absolutely a ghost? And to this guy, yes, it is. Although it's so like thin, but I mean, he's been able to like wind himself up enough that he's like, no, I know what I saw, and I'm terrified of it.
Yeah, and there's an interpretation of the film, especially. I think in the story it's less ambiguous, but there's an interpretation of the film, which is that you're watching as you say, a lonely bachelor having a breakdown when he's forced to stop work, and that he's, you know, I was just thinking, as you were saying earlier, a confirmed bachelor who finds that there's someone in his bedroom he's not expecting to be there, and that his bed is more messed up than he was. There's some, you know, Jonathan Miller, I think, quite knowingly brings in some probably sort of psychosexual stuff that I don't think M.R. James would consciously have been aware of in the same way.
No, even though it kind of, well, I mean, they say write what you know, and M.R. James did, at least from what I've read, tended to write these sheltered academic characters in search of knowledge, and it is believed generally that he was like, people who knew him have said that, you know, he was a confirmed bachelor, and probably what one might describe as a non-practicing homosexual. So, but of course, like, you know, being active around the turn of the century, like that kind of queer discourse wasn't really present. But, you know, you can certainly read it into like quite a bit of his work.
Yeah, and I think part of the popularity of M.R. James's short stories as well, they're one of those things. As a teenager, I had, you know, the complete Sherlock Holmes, the selected stories of M.R. James. There were these books that you would sort of just go back to as a comfort read. And actually, when you're a teenager, M.R. James's stories are so sexless, really.
Right.
You can bring all sorts of readings to them, but he wrote most of them to be read to schoolboys at Christmas, you know, or so they are not. I don't think they're full of subtle sexual meaning that he hid in them. I think they're genuinely pretty sexless, and that suits him, perhaps, that the characters are often these kind of single-minded bachelors who enjoy the company of other men, you know, sitting in the study looking at etchings together or whatever. There's not much of a sense of them being. I mean, there are very few female characters in any of the stories, in fact.
True, because I mean, yeah, he did come from that incredibly cloistered academic world. And there's a short documentary hosted by Mark Gaddis that's on YouTube right now that I watched to get myself up to speed. And he does mention that M.R. James was not I mean, just because of the environment that he was in, like, you know, he wasn't like the most progressive guy. I think he kind of like grumbled about the possibility of women being able to get like degrees from his university, and they talked about his like kind of like intrinsic like resistance to change, and I think that's like a really interesting topic, is this because it's not necessarily a fear that would be like openly expressed, but it's there. Like, what's more comforting in the M.R. James world is kind of this like very retro cloistered British environment, and anything that kind of intrudes upon that is like, oh God, like, it's terrifying.
Yeah, and his characters tend to move from, you know, universities to quiet seaside towns, to quiet villages, to churches. They're in these places that by definition have not changed often for hundreds of years.
Right. And yet he still finds the horror.
Well, there's an element of like something that you're not prepared for sort of intruding into that.
Hmm.
Mm.
The idea of like, well, I'm aware of there being ladies around, but then to meet one is horrifying. What do I even do?
Women, of course, being one of the most terrifying things you can encounter in the horror genre.
And it's interesting, isn't it? In this film, there's a moment when he comes down to dinner, and this very sort of stiff Edwardian setting where he's dressed for dinner in his black tie,
Yes.
comes down to the dining room where there are a bunch of people, including several women, sat around a large dining table, and he, like a child, goes and sits on a table on his own at the end of the main dining table, just sort of isolating himself from. He doesn't even. He could easily, like his friend with the fantastic moustache, who sits with the women and makes polite conversation. Parkin just goes and sits on his own and mumbles to himself. And it is almost, I think, what Michael Hordern conveys with his body language there is just that sort of slight terror at there being other people, and especially I suspect women, that he really wouldn't know how to talk to them.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a woman seated at the table who kind of like looks over at him a couple times, like, maybe she would like to make just polite conversation with him, but she's not penetrating that exterior at all.
No, he does not make eye contact with people, even when he's talking to them. And again, I wonder if it's one of those performances and one of those scripts that, whether they were aware of it at the time, what they were portraying as a sort of typical academic personality, we might now recognise as perhaps somebody who's on the autistic spectrum. If there's some of that in Hordern's performance, I think, in quite a sort of intelligent way, even if at the time that wasn't perhaps the language that wasn't the conversation people were having. I don't know. Miller was a very switched on person who understood, who was very intellectual himself. So it's very possible that he was switched into those conversations and was doing that quite deliberately. Actually, I don't know.
Yeah, because he was as well as he directed the production of The Mikado that came over to the U.S. in the late 80s, which I saw with my parents at the Wiltern Theater, which really cool production because it completely removed like the Japanese accoutrements of the original and just put everybody in like Jeeves and Wooster type clothes, which is kind of a funny twist on the Mikado. But he was also like a public intellectual in Britain. Was he not, like, appearing on television and After Dark and stuff like that?
Yeah, he had an interesting reputation. I sort of remember him as a kid as being almost the typical pretentious intellectual. So he was sort of he was quite widely mocked for being a bit pretentious and a bit over intellectual and being a bit self-regarding. I don't know if any of that is fair, but that's certainly, I remember how he was presented in the media. But his early career and the thing that he was famous for before things like Whistle and I'll Come to You was being part of the Beyond the Fringe crew with Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett and Peter Cook. So this very sort of cutting edge invention of alternative comedy, satire boom, early 1960s thing. And he was kind of the outlier there. The others went on to careers in comedy, and Miller went off into theatrical productions and intellectual pursuits rather than comic pursuits. If you think of his career and Dudley Moore's career at absolute opposite ends, Jonathan Miller would never have been in Arthur 2 on the Rocks.
Yeah, but you can tell, and you mentioned his comedy roots, and you also mentioned like the kind of the way that Whistle and I'll Come to You plays out is almost like a very subtle comedy. Like he definitely, Miller was definitely a guy who understood like comedy, and it does kind of add that little something extra to Whistle and I'll Come to You, where it's like it is almost comedic, just the absolute mundanity, but also like the absolute clarity that you get of this portrait of a type of guy, a capital G guy. And going back to what you said before that, like, yes, like Professor Parkins is 100% in the canon of, have you seen this neuroatypical representation?
Right, yeah. What could be more terrifying than an unexpected guest?
Oh, God.
Yeah, see?
I'm shaking. I'm shaking and crying.
Yeah, you're going to turn in for the night and no, someone wants to come out and hang out and make small talk. Like, no!
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, already kind of gone into what kicked off A Ghost Story for Christmas, which of course was that 1968 adaptation of Whistle and I'll Come to You. But Ray, can you talk a little bit about how this happened? Because I think that Whistle and I'll Come to You was part of a series called Omnibus, but then it started this annual tradition on television, correct?
Yeah, and I suppose it's worth saying that writers like John Deere, who I've been lucky enough to correspond with a little, he's working on a book about the Ghost Story for Christmas, which is going to be an epic work when that comes out, which I think is due fairly soon. John knows, he's got a website called Views from a Hill, which has essays about all sorts of aspects of these films and related media. And he will be someone who would understand the politics of the BBC at the time better than I do. But one thing I've picked up is that the BBC was this, at that point, quite well-established bureaucracy, and there was a documentary unit and a drama unit, and they were not supposed to overlap, and it all got very bad-tempered between them if they trod on each other's toes. But I think Miller's Whistle and I'll Come to You is an example of a drama made by the documentary unit, and they would do this from time to time. So an earlier example in the same strand was a film called Song of Summer, directed by Ken Russell, about the composer
about
Frederick Delius. Yeah,
yes,
and that was in the same strand and was sort of presented as a drama documentary. But anyone who watches it goes, okay, this is a brilliant drama, almost that feels like a horror film at times. And Lawrence Gordon Clark, who made most of the rest of the Ghost Story for Christmas movies or films in the 70s, was from the documentary unit at the BBC, and he made them as with a documentary crew and documentary budget, which I think is probably what gives some of the early ones their unique feel to an extent as well. They're shot a little bit like documentaries. And yeah, the story goes that he saw Whistle and I'll Come to You and said, hold on, M.R. James hasn't been adapted as much as he ought to have been. This is brilliant. This would make a really good recurring kind of approach to ghost stories, and we could do them at Christmas, which is when it's traditional. And that led to so Whistle and I'll Come to You is in black and white, and is, I would say, quite an arty production, as well as being funny and all of those other things. It's quite a Jonathan Miller production. Lawrence Gordon Clark had a little bit more, I think, of a sense of a popular touch. So his films, he made the first 7 of the 8 Ghost Stories for Christmas that were shown during the 1970s. He directed all of them and wrote some of them, and they're in colour. They're a little bit less subtle, I would say, than Whistle and I'll Come to You. But they became very much sort of a tradition throughout the 70s that it would be one every Christmas. The first 5 are based on M.R. James stories. Then he starts to branch out with The Signalman, based on a Charles Dickens story. And then the final 2 stories are based on original fiction. They have contemporary settings, and the very last story Lawrence Gordon Clark wasn't attached to at all.
The Signalman is Dickens coming back around.
Yeah,
from Christmas Carol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I wanted to mention that last one that Clark wasn't involved with, The Ice House, which I think I forgot to mention that I also revisited that one last night, because I remember Tim in particular really liking that episode. In fact, the reason I watched it initially, like a while back, was because Tim was like, dude, you got to see this crazy episode of Ghost Story for Christmas. And in fact, I think it's an episode which is somewhat deprecated. At least that's the impression I get. Like, it's considered not as strong as the rest of the
well, I think it deviates from the form, might be why people don't generally like it as much as the others. But I don't know if Ray, you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking, when you look at the full list of stories and you include Whistle and I'll Come to You in the full list, there are certain things they have in common. So they've got these Victorian or Edwardian settings or historical settings. They're set in the English countryside, maybe in East Anglia, Suffolk or Essex or Norfolk or wherever. They have, as you say, like you could look at all of them and say that they've all got 2 or 3 of these components. They've got a lone, sort of slightly academic fellow with whiskers or whatever who is the main protagonist. So not all of them have all of these things, but most of them have some of them. And Stigma starts to drift away from that because it has a contemporary setting. that is an example of folk horror in this series, I would say. And it doesn't. It starts to drift, but it still feels close enough. It's got things in common with the Stone Tape, and it's got that sense of the British landscape and what have you. It feels close enough that people could live with it. And the Ice House, if you look at that, then at the other end of the chain from Whistle and I'll Come to You, it has almost nothing in common with it, other than a slightly lonely man checks into a hotel or a hospice or hostel or whatever it is. So that's about the only thing it's really got in common. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't feel like it. The story isn't based on M.R. James. It's quite overtly sexual, which feels way out of step with some of the earlier films. Yeah, it's just very different. But I agree. If you just think of it not as a ghost story for Christmas, but have you seen this interesting film, I think it's fascinating. Yeah, I think I really like it.
I mean, I in particular, I like the two leads in it, like the man and the woman, the brother and sister. I don't know, just because of how off-putting they are.
Yeah,
as,
like
as hosts.
her whole like constant like soothing, ingratiating tone, like is it really like unsettles you like as it continues, because you know she's being disingenuous and that it's building towards something like very bad, but the way that she puts like this gentle, caring face on it, but also she's like probably fucking her brother, so that's the thing. Like it's like oh god,
Very
this
weird.
is ugh.
Yeah, the things it reminded me of most are it sort of seemed to preempt The Hunger, the Tony Scott film with David Bowie and whoever else. It's Catherine Deneuve, is it? I can't remember.
Catherine Deneuve, and Susan Sarandon.
That's who the two characters reminded me of most, and you could easily see them as very similar sort of incestuous vampire characters. And the other thing is it's very similar in mood to the stories of Robert Aikman, who is another writer whose stature has just grown and grown over the last sort of, I would say, 30 or 40 years. Now he's now almost become part of the core canon of the English ghost story, but his stories often have that kind of sense of unresolved. You get to the end and you just think, what the fuck just happened? You're not really, I didn't like it. I don't know what happened, but I didn't like it. And that's what the Ice House has, a really Aikman-esque vibe to it, I think. But that's not the same as an M.R. James. It's totally the other end of the scale from M.R. James.
I feel like what's done deliberately about the Ice House that does differentiate it, in addition to like the sexuality and then some of the other elements that aren't found in the rest of the M.R. James work, is that this takes place on like this like sunny like springtime like nice like resort area, sort of to the point where it's like, what do you even have to be afraid of? Like, this is a sunny afternoon. Why are you so uptight? Like, you should be relaxed. So that the environment is so counter to what you'd expect from a ghost story. I feel like that just makes the the main character's misgivings so out of place. It's like, everything is nice here. Why can't you just relax?
I love that, and it's something that we've touched on before. If you go back to our episode on The Velvet Vampire, which of course is a horror story that takes place in the sun-drenched California desert, when you get a creator who can actually pull that off, like doing horror in broad daylight, like that's kind of cool. I think that a lot of people don't attempt it because they, first of all, like, what like horror stories are supposed to take place in
why isn't this like a windswept moor or something,
right? But when you have somebody who can pull off that switcheroo, it's really, really cool. It's very rare, and the Ice House is a little weird and clunky in places, but the concept is so interesting, and like the performances kind of put it across. Like, I don't feel as negatively as like some reviewers seem to think of it. And Tim is certainly a fan because he introduced me to it.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. It's not that there's anything wrong with the film. It's just that when you've got an expectation of your ghost story for Christmas, which is that it will have a little bit of that Dickensian top hats and what have you, it just feels, I guess, like a disappointment. And it's interesting that, having lost Lawrence Gordon Clark, he was around the same time he was making a one-off ghost story for the other main channel in the UK, ITV. He was adapting an M.R. James story, casting the runes for ITV at the same time, and that is much more and I think I've got this right. That was the seasons when these things were shot and shown are all quite muddled. But I think that was actually shown in May and shot in winter. So it's actually really snowy. It feels more Christmassy now than any of the ones that were actually made for Christmas. And that is, I guess, was giving people a little bit more of what they might have expected from a ghost story, even if it wasn't actually shown at Christmas.
For sure.
And it does seem like I know we're skipping over a lot of the 70s ones that are kind of the core of the series, but it seems like it has been, especially in like the the 2010s and so on, is really more a return to that form in particular.
Yeah, and Mark Gatiss is interesting because he I think is he. I'm trying not to be too critical, but I think he verges on almost kind of fan fiction territory, and he's almost trying to recreate the BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas of the 70s and the feeling he got from watching those.
Mm-hmm.
So they do end up being quite conservative. They often end up. He's been criticised for it's the 21st century and why hasn't there been a story adapted from a female author yet? He actually did correct that the Christmas Before Last by adapting an E. Nesbit story, but they all have period settings, and they're sort of reaching back into that Edwardian Victorian world of men in the study smoking cigars and drinking brandy together. There's that they haven't moved with the times, and I think they are an attempt to give people what he thinks they want from a ghost story for Christmas, I think.
And yeah, that is certainly a way to take it. But the thing to understand too, whether it's M.R. James or whether it's like H.P. Lovecraft, like they were writing in their contemporary times, and it's only us looking back through history going, oh, this needs an Edwardian setting. This needs to be set in the 20s or the 30s. And I think that it's interesting that what you're doing with Municipal Gothic, I mean, even the title itself is evocative of saying, we don't have to set ghost stories in this remote environment. We don't have to necessarily set them in, the Edwardian period or somewhere remote. They can be like in your own neighborhood.
Yeah, and the Municipal Gothic was a kind of slightly came together by accident. I had a bunch of stories that ended up feeling similar, but they don't all quite fit the theme. The last collection, Intervals of Darkness, was a bit more varied, and the one I've written now, I kind of that's coming out fairly shortly. I gave myself some rules with that one, and one of them was don't set anything in the past. Try and set everything now. Give it a contemporary setting. I really challenged myself to do that, and it's amazing how much I missed the comfort zone of, I'm going to set this in the 70s because it was creepier then. I'm going to set this in the 19th century because it was more ghostly. And when you force yourself to set things now and accept that we do live in a world of smartphones and we do live in a world of the internet, can that be scary?
And that's something that you talked about in J horror as well, about technology often being like the venue for horror.
Yeah, I found it quite inspiring to rediscover J horror, and this does connect, I think, because most of them are ghost stories, which is that sense that the ghost story was something that was old fashioned. It was a relic, and actually, what we wanted through the 80s and the 90s were psycho killers and monsters and creatures from the id and one thing and another. What we didn't want was traditionalist revenants who. You find out why the ghost is unsettled and why they're still lurking. You solve the mystery, you get vengeance for them, and that helps them go away. Is kind of the promise of the more traditional ghost story. And J horror plays with that a bit, but it certainly also pointedly tries to say we are going to make modern technology the source of the haunting in this, or an aspect of the haunting. So yeah, an attempt to make ghost stories that are not Victorian or Edwardian at all.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to see a ghost story for Christmas present a contemporary story, but it seems like it's probably more beholden to its institutional trappings, where it's just like, we're just going to do more Edwardian stuff. We know what you guys are here to see.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which, I mean, I like some of the stories that have been done, under Gaddis's direction. Like I like the Lot 249. I thought that was a rollicking adventure. So yeah, if you're here for that particular kind of thing, it sounds like ghost stories are going to deliver that.
And it's absolutely a treat every year. I like a lot of people, I watch them and then go online and grumble about how I would have done it differently, like what sort of armchair quarterback thing. But I think I look forward to it every Christmas, and I said this year it really struck me. It's a moment when that's a thing over Christmas. As somebody that likes ghost stories, that's a moment for me to say everyone else has usually gone to bed. I get to sit down and watch my half hour, my silly little ghost story, and I always really enjoy watching it, even if I've got qualms or complaints with exactly how it's been handled. But I'm glad they're still happening, and I'm told if Mark Gatiss didn't make them happen, they wouldn't happen. It's not that the BBC is desperate for them to happen. He has to every year persuade them to do it and scrape something together with the budget he's been given, so that we just wouldn't have them if it wasn't for his efforts. So no, very very grateful that he makes them happen somehow.
Yeah, it is very much. It seems like a labor of love on his part because, like Jen, I watched that history of horror, and it seems like he's really established himself as sort of an academic of horror history since like League of Gentlemen, and he's really like kind of leaned into the just being a champion of
he's
horror.
a real keeper of the flame in that respect. And God bless him for it, because I do enjoy what I've seen of like the later, I guess you could say the second series of A Ghost Story for Christmas. We probably quibble about him. I should go back and rewatch him because it's been a while, but I appreciate that he's doing the work, because I don't know. I mean, I like genre stuff. It's as simple as that. I like when somebody with a real like intellectual bent toward the material as well as a deep love for it does it. And I do take your point about, how sometimes he approaches it in like a fan fiction-y way, like that kind of like God, it's been so long since I watched like any Doctor Who, but like a lot of the showrunners on like more recent Doctor Who, where it feels more like, oh my God, I finally get to play in this sandbox and,
Exactly.
I can do what I want. And really taking like kind of like a fanish approach to the characters is like a real danger. But I don't think that Gaddis is as much of a like that kind of guy as say like a Russell T Davis or somebody like that.
No, there's a common complaint about modern film and TV, which is that it's like modern Star Wars, for example, is made by people who've only ever watched Star Wars, whereas Star Wars was made by someone who loved Akira Kurosawa movies. And I think so that's a complaint you could level maybe against. I'm not a huge Doctor Who obsessive, but modern Doctor Who sometimes feels like it's been made by people who've watched too much Doctor Who, whereas old Doctor Who was made by people who there wasn't any Doctor Who to watch. But I think Gatiss is totally steeped in the history of the English ghost story. I've got an audio book of him reading stories by E.F. Benson, and his readings of those are brilliant. And he's someone that's absolutely kind of he knows his stuff. He's not someone he's not only adapting or copying the 1970s ghost story for Christmas. He is sort of deep in the source material, I think. But yeah. I thought that the one that aired this Christmas, I thought you could also sense that someone somewhere was saying, "Oh, you have to show the ghost; it's too boring otherwise." And I think, if you look back at Whistle and I'll Come to You, where you catch a glimpse of a sheet whirling in the air, and you listen to that horrible sound of Parkin's voice, and that's what you get. And the Christmas story we got this year, we had a Joanna Lumley in makeup lurching towards the camera for slightly too long, so you could really look at the makeup and say, "It's not that great."
Right, yeah. Slightly too long is the best way to put it. Yeah,
it's too bad, because the few glimpses that you get in that 68 Whistle Will Come to You are terrifying. And I'm saying that as someone who has seen it a few times and I know what's coming. And this has a lot to do with what you mentioned earlier, Ray, about kind of like the that delightful analog feel of like this kind of horror. I believe that most of, if not all of the first series were shot on 16, cost-saving measure. So you get like all that wonderful film grain. There's quite a bit of stock music used in the earlier ones, things like like the BBC could get what it wanted, I believe, like, so there's like Ray Fun Williams in Lost Hearts and stuff like that. But then and it drove me crazy that for Stigma I could not find a credit for the music anywhere, because there is a very 70s use of analog synthesizers for the spooky music, and it is so cool. Like that is my exact shit. I love it so much. And I was like, I want to know who made that. Who did this? Like, even if I can't like listen to it as a soundtrack, at least tell me who did it. But I haven't been able to find it.
Well, I remember like BBC had like an audio like research lab, and they're the ones that did the music for the Stone tape. So it might be that kind of situation.
That would be my assumption, yeah. And the BBC, they either had access to, say, to enormous libraries of stock music, which maybe they wouldn't credit, or they had the Radiophonic Workshop, which is a cornerstone of that sort of hauntology, I think. The idea of a room full of nerds making noises from oscilloscopes and later on from actual proper synthesizers. But that's all part of the idea that, and again, growing up, everything on the BBC seemed to be soundtracked by experimental synth music, and that was like children's TV shows and documentaries and light entertainment programs. So weird stuff that if you heard the music in isolation, you'd think was very avant-garde, music from Crete or whatever. So strange.
That's what I love about it, is that it was really just like a cost-cutting measure. Like you're paying a guy to plug some stuff in and twiddle some knobs instead of, say, like session musicians.
Yeah.
But they inadvertently...
It could have been Muzak, but...
They inadvertently made such cool music. And, there's been a whole like latter-day flowering of musical expression that has come out of those like early, very utilitarian like pieces. I love that stuff. It's so good. I love the sound design, especially in Whistle and I'll Come to You. You have like the professor's like expressions of horror, and then just that like weird repetitive sound, and like the grainy slowed down film of whatever it is like approaching. It is so scary, even if you know what's coming.
I think what's interesting, you said about what's coming, but what I still don't really know is how they did it. I still don't really know what I'm looking at on the screen. Like some fabric being turned around on a fishing line. I don't know. I think Jonathan Miller very possibly actually summoned the ghost to make it. That's my only explanation.
Yeah, it's a guy dreaming that he's being chased by a sheet.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is kind of, hangs a lampshade or drapes a sheet over, like the classic ghost of like it just being put a sheet over yourself. Like it's not anything, but he weaves something out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole like and of course like the kind of traditional ghost comes from like the burial shroud. And so that is a kind of like primal terror that we experience, but here it's like transferred to a bed sheet and it shouldn't work, but it does work because what else is more evocative of waking up at 3 a.m. and seeing a shape in your room and being like, oh my god, what is that? Like I can't count the amount of times I've woken up and been terrified of my office chair because I didn't recognize it at first.
Right,
my god, there's something hunching over my bed. Oh, it's a chair.
It's a jacket and a hat hung on the back of the door. Watching you sleep. Yeah. Right.
It's Darth Vader.
I'm just thinking as well, there's something, I hadn't really thought of this before, but there's something in M.R. James about this very correct and upright world of, tweed jackets and dressing for dinner and so on. And then actually the moments of encountering the supernatural, they're quite dirty or grubby. And I'm thinking of that scene where you see the thing on the beach in his dreams sort of pursuing him, and it looks like a really filthy sheet. And I'm wondering, there's something like dirt like is a thing in M.R. James that that he might not particularly address sexuality head on, but he certainly addresses the idea that these very clean living ivory tower people encountering, getting their hands dirty. And Parkin, in fact, scrapes the filth out of the whistle, doesn't he? And says like, "Oh, dirty" or something.
Yeah.
Which is,
Yeah, and it certainly comes through in something like Lost Hearts,
Mm.
which is one of the few I recall that, and admittedly, I'm not like up to speed right now, but it does deal with notions of class
Mm.
because the figures doing the haunting in that one are kind of like
Well, the two like orphan
throwaway
children.
children.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a Roma girl and a Italian
I think.
boy. And the way that they kind of intrude into this estate for their vengeance. Like, oh my God, like foreigners have breached the perimeter.
Hmm.
Um, and a kind of thing which should be almost comical is like, oh, it's a little, it's a boy playing a hurdy-gurdy. Like, it's
Hmm.
funny, but like that makes it more
Well,
terrifying,
that's
especially because,
another. That's more great use of music too.
yeah, like it's that and that's certainly a motif that you see a lot in horror, almost to the point of overuse. Is like, oh, we're going to contrast like the light and fluffy with the terror, so we're going to play like a happy song over spooky happenings.
Right.
Hmm.
um Not saying it can't be like really effective, it's just that you see it a lot to the point where it can get like tedious.
Yeah.
um
One of the other, but yeah, what you're saying about class in Lost Hearts, like there's, the boy who goes to visit, what's it, Peregrine Abney, who is a, well-to-do man. He has a butler and he has a maid, and
mhm.
the two of them like kind of know not to ask questions. Like they're just like, oh, that's just Mr. Abney. He does what he does, and sometimes children go missing under his care. But yeah, he is.
Yeah.
But he's sort of like above the fray. Like he's able to get away with it because of his station.
Right. And what a
So
what a character, like the character of his like much older like cousin, however many times removed, who is quite, he's so happy to see this kid and really accommodating, like, no, go ahead, explore the grounds, like, fine boy, like get some exercise and
yeah,
just right.
interesting. Say you're 12. Yeah, and your birthday is when? He's like
Oh,
immediately
yeah.
sizing us up, like measuring him for a coffin.
Yeah, and of course, like watching in 2026, like we know in our bones that no good comes out of an adult with extraordinary interest in children. But, just watching this, you're like, oh God, there's this. What does this guy want? What does he want? It's not good. It's not going to be good, is it? And sure enough, he's really into magic, which is funny. Um, I love that character of like the, kind of like the academic who's like reading like old grimoires and stuff like that and is like, oh shit, I can actually make this work. It's a very funny idea.
And that story, I was thinking as well about how none of them, they're not all the same. They often share sort of themes or atmosphere or writers or whatever. But Lost Hearts is different because it's an M.R. James story, which is set in has a deeper historical setting, and it almost feels like a pastiche of Wilkie Collins or serious gothic
Right.
fiction. It's much
Woman
more
in White.
gothic,
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of thing. And it's and not to get too depressingly deep, but there is also something very real about the way we now know in the 21st century that people exploiters operate, which is they find vulnerable people, they work out what their weaknesses, what they need,
Yep.
orphans, people who need a guardian, don't have anywhere to live, and that is and in the guise of kind of kindness and gift giving and don't worry, I'm here to protect you, are actually in this case in a very literal way, aiming to take from them.
Yes.
I do find, I think Lost Hearts, I think is it's again an early outlier amongst the others. It doesn't quite fit, and the music thing's interesting as well. I'm sure I saw Lawrence Gordon Clark being interviewed where he said he was really annoyed at having to use that music because they couldn't afford to get any proper music written. They had to use a piece of library music, but I think it just works so brilliantly. It's so unnerving and jangly, and
Yeah.
as you say, if it wasn't just so brilliantly directed, it would look stupid, but it doesn't. It puts a shiver up my spine. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it is sort of endemic to the characters. It makes sense. It fits. And yeah,
yeah,
like you say, it is about a person of affluence preying on marginalized people who can't protect themselves, or who, like, there's no one else to protect them. Like there's no one else looking out for them. And he seems like such kind of like a goofy, silly character until you realize he has much darker designs on
yeah.
on our young Stephen.
And I'm trying to think, are there other stories in the series as well that finish with you thinking, feeling slightly triumphant and happy that the ghosts have done their thing? Like, that they have they've got their vengeance, and a bad guy has been vanquished. That's like the ghosts of the heroes in that one almost.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah,
That's different.
I was definitely sitting there waiting, like okay, like when is this guy gonna get got by the ghost, because it's richly deserved.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even like amongst the other things, like just the reveal of when Stephen has that dream and he sees the two children, and the one's got like the instrument in front of him, and he just moves it and he sees that like his heart has been cut out and the girl's heart has been cut out. Very gruesome reveal.
Yeah.
They get quite intense, some of these as well, for films on the BBC in the 1970s. There's that, and there's also the terrifying spider babies in the ash tree, which the last time I watched it, I'd sort of forgotten exactly how. And again, they just flashed on screen for a moment. It's probably not the world's best special effects, but when you just see it for a moment when you're not expecting it, genuinely startling. They can be quite pretty gruesome at times.
Yeah, the ash tree too is. I try to see what like the theme of each of these is, and I think the ash tree is just like, yeah, there's some places that just it can't be helped. Like, just don't go there. Like,
yeah,
you can't like slap a coat of paint on a haunted house. Like, it's just gonna continue to be like that.
Yeah,
and that kind of seems like the same theme from Stigma, because it is just this family that has the misfortune of sort of moving into the wrong place, and the workers come by and move one of the standing stones, and it's like, sorry, you're cursed now.
But that's interesting, isn't it? Because I said earlier that was it's an original story and not connected to M.R. James, but back to that theme of M.R. James, put that back where you found it. They move the stone, which is just let's get the digger out and the workman and move the ancient standing stone. Which and anyone who's seen any of these knows you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's a kind of don't go in the basement moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or like the the big setup for Poltergeist, for example, where it's like, we'll move the cemetery. You didn't move the bodies. Like, it's bad. And it's interesting to contrast this with like American stories, because America, the United States being like a young country, we often don't have that same sense of history, like deep in the earth, that a lot of these British horror stories too. I think to a degree, because like we as Americans are extremely squirrely about actually engaging with the history of our founding and what our country was founded on. Not that there aren't people in the United Kingdom who are also like resistant in a very reactionary way to these themes, but
yes, still recent enough that you can't like address it directly without everyone having a bad time.
Right. But it still feels like, and especially like the real comparison here is like TV from America in the 70s versus TV from Britain in the 70s. We've said it before on the show. American TV in the 70s was garbage, like just
vast
trash.
Cultural wasteland.
Right, which is why I think a lot of these British TV series and teleplays are so fascinating to me, is like where they are willing to go, even with like the, censorship from higher ups, or, kind of like cultural squeamishness about certain topics. I mean, Penda's Fen came out in 1974 on television. It is astonishing that it dealt that frankly with queerness and just being a weird teen in the rural United Kingdom. Incredible. You wouldn't touch those topics on American TV in the 70s. And I mean, even something like Stigma, which in a very European way has frank nudity, not titillation. It's just a woman reacting with horror to the betrayal of her own body.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I know there are people that stick up for American TV in this period. I have a friend, Jamie Evans, who's also a writer of weird fiction, whose particular obsession, and I think he would be happy with me calling it an obsession, is anything that Rod Serling has been involved with, and he loves the Night Gallery.
Right.
It's not
Okay, yeah,
something I've
fair.
explored myself, and I wonder if that's where you find in those sort of anthology series is where you find the closest thing. But I tend to agree that when I have watched I've tried to look where are the American ghost stories for Christmas, and the ones I've watched, you tend to get things like it will be a little bit less subtle, and the story will be a little bit more obvious and direct, and it might have a really terrible disco theme tune instead of a piece of ligety or something. So yeah, I feel like there was something going on in. And I imagine at the time, a lot of people watched British TV from this period and thought, "Why is it so weird and bad?" You know, I'm not sure. I'm sure that not everyone loved it at the time. Why is it so bleak? Why is everyone so sad?
Why are they so cheap?
Aged well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Well, that's
think
just Doctor Who.
I would say that Rod Serling is probably the exception that proves the rule. Not that there wasn't good stuff occasionally on American television in the 60s and 70s, but I mean, there's a reason why Rod Serling's reputation is so durable. He really was working at another level of writing for the medium. And I don't think there are that many people who could match him. And there just didn't seem to be the demand for it on television. And I think, I can think of interesting stuff, like interesting American horror from the 70s. There's, God, what's that called? There's that one with Kim Darby where they're like little gremlins living in the house. I forget what it's called.
Yeah, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark.
Yes, there's that one. There's the one everybody loves with Karen Black and the three. That's an anthology, I think. The trilogy.
Yeah,
of Terror.
I'm blanking on the name. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So it wasn't as though that they couldn't occasionally put out a good thing. I just feel like maybe kind of the more interesting creativity in American media was in the film industry in that second golden age of Hollywood, and TV was
and another
variety
thing too,
shows.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about, 70s, I guess this would be 80s, but yeah, the contrast that we mentioned in the bleakness versus the more of the UK stuff versus the more saccharine US stuff we covered in our episode about Threads, contrasting with, I think it was with the day after tomorrow. Yeah, the day after. Yeah, which is more of an upbeat, happy ending where it's yeah, the bombs drop, but hey, we're gonna be friends, right? I got a girlfriend out of it. Versus Threads, where it's
Steve Gutenberg.
Yeah. Threads was no, there's no hope. Do not drop an atomic bomb on.
Yeah.
And civilization
it just
will
occurred to me. I wonder if maybe it doesn't have a lot to do with the fact that British TV or the BBC was publicly funded as opposed to in the United States, it was commercial networks and advertising driven.
Yeah, I was thinking of the examples I've seen of American supernatural TV. One thing that is definitely holds it back is the fact that it has that rhythm of building up to the ad break, coming back from the ad break, building up to the next ad break. Whereas these ghost stories for Christmas have this 30, 40, 45-minute run of just that's the form, no interruptions. It's a complete whole piece. And I think there is something about, there's also something about this growing thread recently of people talking about the perfect length for a film is about 88 minutes. And if you can watch a film that's 45 minutes, you've got time to watch two and still get to bed early. So, there's something about the form is kind of perfect, I think.
Yeah, I'll watch another one of these if they're only 35 minutes. Sure.
Yeah.
Throw another one on. Some of the older episodes that we didn't really get to talk about, talking about the 70s, because we did mention Lost Hearts and Stigma, but one of the other standouts, in my opinion, is The Signalman, one of Denholm Elliott. And I just, because again, that is sort of a cloistered sort of academic, as the signalman, Denholm Elliott is a guy who has a job that isn't really particularly taxing, but he reads and he tries to better himself. So he does kind of fit that mold of the protagonist of one of these ghost stories. And yeah, he ends up encountering things that he can't explain.
Yeah, and I think another thing about these one-off TV anthologies or one-off films is that you can get an actor of the caliber of Denholm Elliott. You can get him for 45 minutes for a one-off film. You wouldn't be able to get him for an episodic TV
Right.
show, perhaps, but you could get someone of that caliber. And his performance, playing an unusual part for him, he tended to play wealthy, well-educated, upper-class characters. But there he's playing a working-class, an expert, but a working-class man.
Yeah,
And he
the
does it
accent
absolutely
being a
brilliantly.
tell.
Yeah, he's absolutely credible, I think. And things like the fact that he's actually learned how to operate the signals, I think, comes across. He's done a bit of, done his homework.
Yeah.
And then the climactic moment of that, again, if you actually analyze what you've seen on screen, it's like a death mask and a bit of smoke and a few surprising camera moves and some strange noises. There's very little actually that you see.
Mhm.
Yeah, but your
But
mind is there
the
to fill in
image,
the gaps.
exactly, and the image stays with you. I see it. I see, even when I see a still of that image of the sort of grimacing death mask face.
Yeah.
The British Film Institute put that on the cover of their original box set of the Ghost Stories for Christmas, and just as an image, you see it, and you say, "What's that?" That it's such an attention grabbing image.
Yeah, it's a different
Yes.
presentation in that they do have, like you say, in these one-off short films that they're making, they do have a chance to try something different and not really be beholden to the form and the expectation of, we got to do 20 more of these, so we have to have like our sort of dramatic language locked down. Like they can try different things, and
Yeah,
hey, if
exactly.
it doesn't work, we'll do another one. We'll try it
Yeah.
again. We'll try something else.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned it, that this is not an M.R. James story; it's Dickens.
hmm
Yes.
A really fascinating story about a lot of different things, but to me, like the most interesting thing about it is are its themes of kind of like wasted potential and like being trapped in a weird way and like the weight of responsibility and
Right.
also that
It does have something like he is in a sort of living purgatory. Like
Yeah.
he's, he has notions of bettering himself, of like learning, algebra and things like that. But yeah, his job is, as he describes, it's like, yeah, a kid could do this. It's pulling a lever when the bell rings. But that is the one thing that he has to do. If you were a ghost, trapped in a particular location, like condemned to like relive this experience over and over again, like how would that be any different than what this guy's doing with his actual life?
Yeah. And he's cut off down in that railway cutting, which could almost be, if you were to try and picture what might purgatory be like, what might it be like to be trapped between worlds? It might be somewhere like that, a signal box in a cutting where you can barely see the sun. It's just that the location is brilliant as well.
Yeah, it's this really oppressive, like just little valley that, he has the windows looking out, but what does he see? He sees the tunnel and the track.
Yeah.
You can even make the case of the tunnel being a portal between worlds. Like there's a notion there of like what's on the other side of that. So it does have like useful visual language to help establish his themes.
But yeah, that's certainly the moment when you get the sense that Lawrence Gordon Clark was branching out. I think there've been 5 M.R. James adaptations in a row, and perhaps the previous 2, I like them both quite a bit, but maybe they're less well regarded. The Treasure of Abbot Thomas and The Ash Tree, they're not the 2 that people usually mention as their favourites. So perhaps it was time to branch away from the formula. We'll try a story by Dickens. And then branch away even further with Stigma, which was based on an original story. That's sort of how it feels like it went to me.
It's kind of like what Carpenter planned to do with the Halloween movies, where it's like, it's just some aspect of Halloween, but you're like, no, give us more Michael Myers. Just keep doing that. Like, all right, fine.
Yeah. We just want M.R. James. But yeah, which is, again, back to the Gatiss conversation. That's kind of where we've got to, 50 years on. And yeah, I was wondering whether John Carpenter ever saw any of these Ghost Stories for Christmas, because I'm pretty sure he would have seen the Stone tape, because there are elements of that in Prince of Darkness, and he was an openly a fan of Nigel Kneale, and Nigel Kneale had his name taken off, right? The script for Halloween 3, I think, but did write the first version of the script or something.
Yeah.
So
And once you know that, like, all the signs are there, because it's basically about it is like sort of pagan druid rituals
mhm.
that are driving it. It's just in a modern setting, which you're like, oh, like the stone tape.
Yeah.
So yeah, it totally
Yeah.
fits. But not just, it wasn't a guy in a William Shatner mask chasing Jamie Lee Curtis around. So people didn't know.
But there is that little twist of the Irish are evil.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Shockingly, it's not British though. Anyway, um, did we cover all of the episodes that we wanted to touch on? Because I don't know if I maybe took the bit and ran away with it, Tim.
I mean, I did want to uh, show my ass about Lot 249, because there is some like fanboy like
Mhm.
fan service in that, and I love it. I mean, I know that it's like dumb and obvious, but it's like, well, this is an intriguing case. Perhaps I'll take it to my skeptical friend. He's like, oh, yes, this is very interesting. You know, I could use a doctor. I'm hoping to start a private investigator service on Baker Street. Oh, the rent there's terrible. And I'm like, he's doing the thing.
But perhaps ill-advised when he only had 30 minutes to play with, and he had to do the whole mummy story as well. But
Right,
I
yeah.
also appreciated it. Yeah. I was also just thinking that the other thing that's worth mentioning is that between the Gatiss era that we're in now and the Lawrence Gordon Clark era, which ended in the late 70s, there are a couple of things that are kind of continuations of the tradition. And one that I think is particularly worth shouting out is the 1989 adaptation of The Woman in Black. The Woman in Black. You mentioned The Woman in White earlier, and now I've got confused. The Woman in Black, which was the screenplay for that was written by Nigel Neal. It was produced for TV, so it's got that, and it was filmed in Essex, so it's got that kind of misty East Anglian English landscape thing going on. And that's actually probably the last time you could make that kind of low-key, slightly muted TV ghost story before everything got very digital and loud, and you had to have electronic drums on it and what have you.
Yeah, and that the woman in Black is an excellent piece of television, and for anyone who's like, oh, jump scares are so cheap, it's got one of the all-time jump scares that still scares me if I remember it. So well worth seeking out. It will scare the crap out of you. And you know, Nigel Neal is the GOAT, so definitely worth seeing. But did you say that there were others that kind of continued in that vein of the ghost story for Christmas, or was it just kind of like a lying fallow until the 2010s?
Well, so I've been digging around, often digging in John Deere's blog and places like that, and writing by people like Adam Scoville and playlists on watch lists on Letterboxd. There are other anthology series. So there was an anthology series in the 1980s that was made by the other channel, ITV. I've forgotten the name of the series, but they adapted a story by Edith Wharton called Afterward in about 1983 or something, which is fascinating because, for a start, it's a story by a woman, not M.R. James or Charles Dickens, and it's told very much from a female perspective. But otherwise, it really has the mood of the country house and the English landscape and the slightly oblique haunting. It's all handled very sort of mysteriously rather than head on. And that one for me, with a little bit of a tweak, you could have aired that on the BBC Ghost Story for Christmas strand, and it would have fit right in. And there are quite a few others of those, and there were other anthology shows on the BBC at the same time as well, which covered similar territory with varying degrees of success. But yeah, there are. You could probably find another 50 one-off TV plays that will give you some of the same thrill if you were so minded.
Tim, it sounds like great. We have homework.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to this episode so I can catch those names a second time.
Couldn't be bothered otherwise, but I want those titles.
Yeah. Normally I just forget about them. It's like I don't even bother. Yeah. Well, yeah, this has been great. A lot of leads for other ghost stories to explore. And yeah, this is unfortunately a series that is not as well known in the US. It's not as much of an institution as it is in the UK. But yeah, hopefully our listeners will get a chance to expose themselves to some great horror, get chased around by a bedsheet.
Yes, there are places to see these. I will link to one in the show notes. These are worth seeking out for anyone who loves genre stuff. If you haven't seen them,
Yeah, a couple of
and
them are on Shudder, unbelievably not on BritBox, which is a shame.
yeah, like what is up with that? Because that was the first place I checked, and I was like, "What?
Yeah.
What the hell, BritBox? What are we
Right.
even paying you for?
Yeah,
You don't deserve our $10 a month or whatever."
10 quid.
10 quid.
Yeah.
The other thing that's on Shudder that's worth watching as well is Keela Janice having an attempt to compete with Mark Gatiss with Last Christmas releasing The Occupant of the Room, which is very much sort of supposed to be like a BBC ghost story for Christmas as well, and that's definitely on Shudder.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah, we'll look for that. Most of all, we want to say thank you, Ray, for doing this, for putting up with us Yanks to teach us a little bit about a very British kind of horror. We really appreciate it. And where is a place where our listeners can find your work?
So the best place to find my stuff is probably my blog. I'm one of those people that is continuing to blog even though no one blogs anymore. And it's at precast.reinforced.co.uk is the name of my blog. And I'm also, the only social media I really use is Blue Sky. I'm on there as raynewman.bsky.social.
Perfect.
We are friends with him on Blue Sky, and you can be too.
The books are Municipal Gothic and Thin Places in Hard Concrete.
Thank you very much. Yes, those are the ones.
Yes, thank you again.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, you can show your support by going to patreon.com/haveyouseenthis and make a pledge at the $2 or $5 tier. $5 a month gets the latest episode before everyone else, plus access to our Discord where we're always arguing about movies. If you'd like to give us a tip, our Ko-Fi link is in the show notes.
Now I got this whistle that I dug up, and I need to clean it out.
Just really blow on it really hard.
Right. That's
if
what you do.
The harder you do, you get like a bigger sheet